Who are you trying to block
We're live,
today?
Madam Chair.
And we are not mumbling.
They're past their prime.
This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. Welcome, folks. This is Thursday, March 30th. And it is feeling like winter out there. I was a little surprised the snow and the ice on the cars this morning, and I was a little surprised on that one. But we are getting ready today as a committee to report our capital bill out on the floor. And so this morning, we're going to have a very light morning in terms of testimony and any committee discussion. I want to allow time for committee members who are reporting the bill to continue working on their reports, and for folks that are to come to me for questions and thoughts for that. I did go over to Senate Institutions Committee yesterday afternoon. We presented the bill, and I think it went pretty well. There were some questions about some portions of it. They will change the bill, I'm sure. And they had a lot of questions about the general fund appropriations, because we did a lot of movement there. And I gave them all the reasoning behind why we made the decisions we did. They seem to be very appreciative of the work that we did for the women's correctional facility replacement of both the incarcerated piece and the reentry piece. They did have testimony from the Maine model, what Maine is doing, and they're glad to see that we're headed in the same direction. That's our goal. So they were very receptive of that. There's a few other pieces that they will change and add, I'm sure. So they will physically be receiving the bill towards the end of this week, probably the beginning of next week for that. The other piece, I also gave them a heads up on H102. That's our art and state buildings. That bill should be going over to Senate Institutions Committee as well. And Troy will be going over there to present the bill at some point, and we'll go from there.
There shouldn't be any problem with that, I wouldn't think, do you?
Depends
Never
who wants to be involved. They want to make sure the bill comes to institutions. So the folks that may be interested in that bill that are not on that committee. We'll see. That's over in their wheelhouse. This morning, we're going to take a look at a Senate resolution. We always need to deal one way or the other with land swaps, forests and parks, quite often between our I just don't quite know how to phrase it. They own a lot of different tracts of land. It's more than just state parks. They have leases with all of our ski areas for land on our mountains that have operations of ski trails and ski lifts. There is usually a 99-year lease for those. So if you look at like Mount Mansfield, you look at Chemo, those are all land leases through the Forest and Parks. They also own, it's not like wildlife management areas like Fish and Wildlife, but something similar to that. There's tracts of land that they own, Champion Lands up in the Northeast Kingdom they own. And sometimes there are boundaries with a private property owner that needs to be clarified or added on to current land that we own, and then we do a land swap. There could be a state park like in Plymouth, and there's some property nearby that maybe needs to change hands, and the Forest and Parks would like to pick up that property because it extends what they currently own. There's a variety of situations that occur. And every year, usually we have something that we have to allow to happen. We do that through a resolution. We don't do that through a standing bill. And we don't do that statute. We do it through a process of a land resolution. So we work with the Senate, with our colleagues on Institutions Committee in the Senate because we're doing the capital bill at the beginning of the year. They do the land resolution. So they've already done this and voted it out of the Senate, and now it's our turn to take a look at it. So I'm not sure who to turn this to, because Michael Chernick is the one that does the drafting. I don't know, Michael, if you're gonna walk us through.
That was my intent.
Okay.
Whether you want Rebecca first or myself, that's obviously at your discretion.
I will go with you, Michael, in terms of the drafting of the bill, and then Becky or Becca? Becca from Forest and Parks will walk us through what the land swap is all about. And someone from the committee
Thank you.
will be reporting this on the floor. So, because somebody's going to do the work.
I should add, there's no, just before I start, there is no ski area this year.
Yeah,
For all of you who are waiting on a ski area, this is not a ski area here.
we've had some of those in gravel pits.
Yes, you've had those. Good morning, members of the Corrections and Institutions Committee. My name is Michael Chernick. I'm one of the legislative counselors. I primarily draft resolutions, and annually I also draft the land swap resolution. And this resolution, as your chair has indicated, has already passed the Senate. There are two transfers this year, and one is in the Jamaica State Park, and the other is in the Coolidge State Forest, dealing with a parcel in Woodstock. So with that, I will go through it clause by clause with you. And then if you have any drafting questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you have substantive questions concerning the lands themselves or the hows or the whys, then you want to wait for Becca, who represents the department and can give you that type of information. With that being said, this is a joint resolution relating to the state land transactions in Jamaica State Park and Coolidge State Forest. Whereas the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, the department, owns and manages the Jamaica State Park, the park in Jamaica, and the Coolidge State Forest, the forest, which includes the Curtis Hollow block in Woodstock, which is what this resolution is focusing on for our purposes. And whereas Jamaica State Park, which is situated adjacent to the West River, includes the widely used West River Trail, and a segment of this trail passes across a 5-acre inholding that Nancy Jane Winslow Revocable Trust, the trust owns, and which is known as the Salmon Hole Lot, the lot. And whereas the public uses the lot to access and picnic along the West River, and for bicycling, cross-country skiing, and hiking on the West River and Overlook Trails, which is a different trail, and which passes through the lot, and Peter Winslow has agreed to acquire this parcel from the trust. And whereas Peter Winslow owns two non-contiguous parcels adjacent to the park, and the department recently discovered that development on one of the parcels encroaches on the park. And whereas the department proposes to convey to Peter Winslow an approximately 20.7 acre parcel that is of little conservation or recreational value, which will resolve the encroachment. In exchange for the department's acquisition of the lot and an associated right-of-way easement across the West River Trail to access the lot. And whereas the department will retain a right-of-way easement along Jacobs Road across the property to be conveyed to Peter Winslow to provide access to the park for both public access and forest management. And whereas James Ellerton, now we're getting to the other situation.
Okay,
And-
so can we just hold for just a
Sure.
sec, Michael? Is there any questions from the committee about the Jamaica piece? Before we
I'm
move
about to
the
start,
vote?
switch subjects entirely to Coolidge.
Any questions? John?
Is the Curtis Hollow block in Woodstock adjacent to the Coolidge State Forest?
It's part of the Coolidge State Forest, and I'm looking at Becca.
Okay.
Yes, it is. It's part of it. I just mentioned that right at the top because the resolution this morning is not dealing with the forest as an entirety. We're dealing with this particular tract and a situation immediately adjacent to the tract. It's not a whole forest issue.
We're gonna get
Most of the
there.
forest is in Bridgewater, right? Correct?
John, we're gonna get there. That's the next section that deals with Coolidge. I just want to make sure there isn't any question on the first part of the resolution that deals with Jamaica. There's two different pieces here.
One resolution, two topics.
Yeah.
Some years there are many more, but this year there are two.
Anything with the Jamaica piece. And then we'll get in, we have the map for the Jamaica piece. And we'll work with Forest and Parks just to see where that lands.
And there were lots of, the Senate spent a lot of time untangling some issues of the Jamaica pieces. Becca will explain.
Okay, so let's move to the Coolidge, and this is where John will have, will clarify some of your questions, okay?
So we're now moving to Coolidge. Whereas James Ellerton, obviously a new principal, whereas James Ellerton owns a 160-acre parcel that separates a segment of the forest. And remember, whenever I say forest here, I've already referred to it. It's a Coolidge State Forest and no other forest of the forest from another parcel of the forest. And he also owns a second parcel the forest separates from his 168-acre parcel. And whereas the 160-acre Ellerton parcel and the separated segment of the forest are both landlocked and lacking in legal access, meaning to the public and to others, and the Vermont Land Trust holds a conservation easement on the 168-acre Ellerton parcel that allows for the subdivision and development of one residential lot. Important point to keep in mind. And whereas James Ellerton has agreed to convey to the department a 102-acre parcel and a 400-foot wide right-of-way easement for a public recreational trail to the summit of Old Baldy Mountain. In exchange, the department will convey to Jamie Ellerton a 102-acre parcel subject to a conservation easement to be conveyed from the department to Vermont Land Trust. And these transactions will eliminate the privately held subdivision and development right under the VLT easement. In other words, the right to build the one house will disappear with all these transactions. Either through extinguishment or conveyance to the department, resolve the access issues related to the 160-acre Ellerton parcel and the separated forest parcel, and provide permanent public recreational access to the summit of Old Baldy Mountain. And whereas 10 VSA, and this is boilerplate language, 2606B authorizes the Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, the Commissioner, to sell, convey, exchange, or lease land or an interest in land, or to amend deeds, leases, and easement interests subject to General Assembly approval. And both the Commissioner and the General Assembly find the following actions to be in the best interest of the state. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the General Assembly authorizes the Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation to take the following actions. First, with respect to Jamaica State Park, to convey to Peter Winslow a parcel of approximately 24.7 acres in the town of Jamaica, with certain deed restrictions prohibiting commercial and residential development and use, and limiting use of the parcel to forestry, recreation, and vehicular access by Peter Winslow. In exchange for the conveyance of the department, Peter Winslow will convey to the department a parcel of approximately 5.4 acres known as the Salmon Hole Lot via a warranty deed without restrictions on use other than commercial and residential restrictions that currently exist in the deed held by the trust. The department shall retain a right-of-way easement for forest management and public recreation purposes across the 24.7 acre parcel from or along Town Legal Trail 12 to access the park. And that's a different trail than the other trails mentioned. That's a distinctive trail. Second, with respect to Coolidge State Forest, to convey to the Vermont Land Trust a conservation easement restricting development and use on 102-acre parcel, which is part of the Curtis Hollow block, to forestry, educational, recreational, and open space purposes, and then to convey the parcel to Jamie Ellerton, subject to the conservation easement, in exchange for the conveyance of the currently department-owned 102-acre parcel to Jamie Ellerton. He shall convey to the department a separate 102-acre parcel adjacent to the forest, subject only to the existing VLT easement, along with a 400-foot wide right-of-way easement for a public recreation trail to the summit of Old Baldy Mountain. Additionally, Jamie Ellerton shall eliminate, either through conveyance or extinguishment, his existing right to subdivide and develop one residential lot on the 168 parcel, and be it further resolved, the Secretary of State be directed to send a copy of this resolution to the Commissioner of Forests, Parks, and Recreation. End of the resolution.
Questions of Michael on this one before we get into the details from Forest and Parks.
Thank you, Counselor.
Right, and if you have, as I said, substantive questions, you're best directed to Becca, not to me.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Michael. Who from the Senate reported this on the floor? Do you remember? Senator Harrison.
Yeah, Senator Harrison, because she was particularly, yes, thank you for
Did
reminding
you
me.
make them?
Senator Harrison from your county, from Wyndham County, had particular interest about the West River. I will add that she was concerned that all the potential sports be listed, and there were some issues concerning that trail and the West River access. And she worked very closely with Becca. We all worked together as a team and came out with mutually agreeable language, and it's the language that you saw this morning.
So Phil, I think it'd be good to reach out to Senator Harrison.
I did that through Senator Ingles, and yesterday invited her to come up if she was available. And I don't know what happened.
Why don't you check with, is it Linda?
Linda Lehman?
Yeah, check with Linda and see if there's, because it would be good to hear from
Yeah,
her.
she was very much involved in the redrafting of this.
And we also should be hearing from the Land Trust folks as well for this, the Vermont Land Trust. So Becca, come on up to the front, and we have new folks in Forests and Parks. Some
Yes.
folks have retired and moved on that are usually before us. So welcome,
Thank you.
Becca, and if you could identify yourself for the record.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name for the record is Rebecca Washburn. I'm the Director of Lands Administration and Recreation for the Forest Parks and Recreation Department. I may be familiar to those of you who have served on this committee for a little while. I was typically in the wings as a support person for Commissioner Snyder when he would come in and present these land exchanges to
And
you.
that's right. We did, we have a new commissioner. That's our long-term commissioner.
We do indeed. So I'm happy to walk through. I was prepared to give a little bit of background, Chair Emmons, around why we're here and what this is all about. I was particularly interested in hearing Representative LaRoche's take on this, given his past role, but I'll have to save that for another time. So I can give a little bit of background as to why we come here, build a little bit on what Chair Emmons described, and then I can walk through each of the proposed land exchanges and answer any questions. As you described, Chair Emmons, the department owns land for a myriad of different purposes. Forest Parks and Recreation owns state parks, state forests, natural areas. The agency as a whole manages on behalf of the public about 360,000 acres, quite a bit of land. And as I said, for a multitude of different purposes. And the section that was referenced in the joint resolution, Title 10, Section 2606, gives our commissioner the authority with governor's approval to acquire land. And we do that very strategically and very thoughtfully in the care of the public. 2606B, which was referenced in the joint resolution, is a separate provision that very specifically asks that the General Assembly approve any conveyances of an interest in land. So as Chair Emmons described, if there's a boundary line adjustment needed, if there's an amendment to a lease with a ski area, or for instance, Camp Downer in Downer State Forest has a lease with the state to operate that camp there. If we needed to make amendments to that lease, we would be bringing those to you and to your counterpart in the Senate to propose these ideas and to seek your approval. And I think the most important sort of guiding principle when considering this is that it's a big deal. We take on ownership of land on behalf of the public for very specific reasons, and in only very rare circumstances do we see that the public stands to benefit from a conveyance out of that land. The gravel pit, as you mentioned, from several years ago, was a situation where we conveyed a piece of land to an adjacent gravel extraction business and have been able to leverage pretty significant land transactions, some of which are represented here in the land exchanges that I'm going to introduce to you. So we don't take this lightly, and I think the guiding principle really is, how is the public going to benefit from what's being proposed? These ideas germinate internally. Sometimes these are initiatives that our staff have been working on for many years. In the case of the two proposals I have today, that is exactly the situation. These are ideas that were germinating and emerging from management issues or ideas and priorities that our state land staff were considering. In other situations, we might be approached by a community or an individual in a community that has an interest in making an exchange. One, Chairman, that you saw maybe several years ago was the Alberg Cemetery. I feel like that's a really good example where the community wanted to expand their cemetery, and we're looking at Alberg Dune State Park as a potential expansion. And this committee spent a lot of time considering the potential public benefits that would arise from that proposal. So here we are, working with the landowners, the private landowners that are involved in these exchanges in this particular case, and state land staff. When we were testifying before the Senate, the land conservation program manager for our department was able to provide some of the nitty-gritty details in response to questions from committee members. He's in New Zealand on educational leave, working with the Nature Conservancy. So unfortunately, I have no wingman today. I'm on my own. He typically works really closely with landowners to develop these ideas. After we've been through this process and hopefully have secured approval, we work to implement the concept that's been approved through that joint resolution. So very thoughtful process, one that we don't take lightly, one that we feel it's in the best interest of the public and certainly you as committee members to only prepare those proposals that make the most sense and are worth the time and energy to discuss and begin to understand. The form of public benefit can be a lot of different things. The Markowski gravel extraction example, the landowner purchased that land from us. In other situations, like the one that I'm going to describe this morning, there are other considerations that create that public benefit on behalf of the way the department either manages the land or the way the public is interested in continuing to use those lands. So we can go through those specific projects when we're ready to, but I'm happy to answer any questions about just sort of how Forest Parks and Recreation approaches this. Questions?
Just sort of lays the groundwork in terms of why we do what we do for the resolution.
Yeah.
What the swaps entail. So every year we do this. Usually there's sometimes it's real simple. Sometimes we only have one. Sometimes we have four. Sometimes we have some that are really, really, really complicated. Like the gravel pit one, because there's profit to be made.
Yes.
From extracting gravel, and were we losing by swapping out and losing that property? Were we losing potential income in the state? So it's those things we have to balance.
And interestingly, this provision in statute only applies to the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. It does not apply to Fish and Wildlife or Environmental Conservation, both of whom the agency own and manage land. So that's just an interesting distinction as well.
Well, also for forests and parks, they're more dependent in terms on user fees than the other departments, per se. I mean, Fish and Wildlife is too, but forests and parks really, you're dependent on people using our state parks and drawing revenue from that to keep your folks afloat. Chip?
So there's one residential parcel allowed in this agreement?
There,
I'm gonna go into
I
that.
can
okay.
walk through and get specifically to
Okay,
that.
I can hold that.
Okay,
Yes, thank you.
Anything else on the broader general? Okay.
great. I'm not sure, I didn't plug in because I think you might have the memo and the maps up. Phil, it would be great to be able to show, oh, sorry.
Do we have more copies of the right map?
It's behind you.
Yes.
So
think
there's
there's-
paper copy there. There's some
This
of
one?
Yeah.
There he's got two.
No, I have to. So the first part of the state that we're going to visit is Jamaica State Park. And for purposes of orientation, in green, that is existing state park land. The entrance to the state park is sort of in the bottom left of it's off the map, but it's over, it's easier to just point, it's at the apex of that trail. So entrance to the state park and the camping off the map. The West River Trail, which is the red dotted line, is the trail and the public access that is referenced in the joint res that Mr. Chernick read to you. And the 5.4 acre parcel is outlined in yellow. The lands owned by the person that we are proposing to exchange with, Mr. Winslow, are here. His residence is this parcel outlined in blue. He also owns this parcel here. The parcel outlined in purple is 24.7 acres of Jamaica State Park that the landowner is interested in exchanging for the 5.4 acre parcel so that his lands are contiguous. This would allow him to be able to manage more effectively. He gets around mostly by side-by-side, terrain vehicle, and this would provide him to have better access to this parcel that he manages as a woodlot.
So let's go through this again, just to be clear.
Yes.
So the upper part in the blue that has one line coming down in purple, that's what he currently owns.
This is his residential house. His
Okay.
house is here. He has some outbuildings. He's been mushroom farming. So that's his residence.
So then the blue on the very bottom there, that's also,
Yes.
but they're not connected.
They're not
Those
connected.
two parcels are not connected.
Mm-hmm.
So what's in between that currently that's outlined in purple belongs to the state.
Yes.
That's part of the state
That's
land, part of the park, right? The forest.
And that's the 24.7 acres referred to in the resolution.
Okay, so then let's go up to the top with the red trail.
Mm-hmm.
The red is the current Red River Trail.
Yep, this is the West River Trail. It
West
follows an
River
old
Trail.
rail bed. It is incredibly popular. Senator Harrison will be able to attest to, there's an organization that manages that trail, nonprofit organization. This is just a connection on a much larger trail that follows that
I
rail.
could actually speak directly to that,
Yeah.
but it's right near my home, it starts in Brattleboro, but using the old railroad right away, when there was an active railroad from Brattleboro to the West River. The West River Trail is a really remarkable organization and effort from citizens to take this unused right of way that was frankly neglected and the state was not aware of the utility of, and put this route together. It's been working with the state really well on that. So this is really great to hear.
Yeah,
So-
I've used that as well.
We have two people speak. So Michelle and then John.
I was just gonna say, I think everybody in Windham County utilizes this trail. I mean, I live in another part of the county, but the West River Trail is really popular both for mountain biking and also for walking. It's right by the river, so there are parts of it you actually can get off your bike and swim and get back on. It's an amazing resource.
John?
Do we have easements on that trail all over to South Londonderry?
I wouldn't say we,
Somebody.
somebody has them.
So it's protected.
I would say by virtue of the fact that it used to be a railroad, similar to the way other rail trails are owned and managed.
So that is currently what's outlined in yellow.
Mhm.
That is currently being used
Yes,
as part of the West River Trail or the Red River Trail.
the West River Trail.
Okay.
As was described, the trail is very long. It's protected in certain places. We have an easement that crosses that yellow portion currently. So the private landowner wouldn't be able to prevent the public from being able to cross that. But there are picnic sites, as you described. There's a picnic table actually on this parcel of land. There's also an archaeological site. So it's small, small but mighty, in the sense that this is a really important piece as it relates to public access. The other thing that I think is quite notable is the private landowner that owns that yellow outline parcel has a vehicular right of access along the West River Trail. So if they chose to exercise their right to develop a camp on that 5.4 acre lot, or for any other reason decided they wanted to begin to have vehicular access to that parcel, they could plow and drive on that rail trail year round.
So who owns that piece that's in the yellow?
Currently, it's owned by a revocable trust, of which Mr. Winslow is part of. And the revocable trust has agreed to convey that parcel to Mr. Winslow in anticipation of the land exchange between Forest Parks and Recreation and Mr. Winslow.
So what's in the yellow is 5.4 acres, and the swap would be 5.4 acres of the revocable trust property. We would receive that in exchange for giving up 24.7 acres of our state-owned forest to Mr. Winslow
Yes,
in the trust,
not the trust.
not the trust.
Just Mr. Winslow. And the conveyance will be through deed, and the deed will contain restrictions that limit the parcel so that there will not be residential or commercial development on that parcel. It will only be used for recreational and forest management purposes. So by conveying it to Mr. Winslow and anyone in the successor chain of title, they will not be able to develop that parcel.
So I find it really kind of odd that the residents of the Winslows is on one side of the forest, and then there's this little 5 acre parcel that's kind of tucked up there. Did they own previously? Did they own more property in there? I mean, it just, why would there be a 5 acre lot on the other side of the forest from where they currently own property?
I think your suspicion is probably correct, and I could confirm that.
Just curious.
That's where the wingman would be really perfect right now.
Yeah, which is not here.
Yeah, he's not here. But I could follow. It's either that, or in some instances, because of the water frontage, there has been development patterns where there might have been several little lots along that river frontage that the state has acquired over time, and then just wasn't able to acquire that one 5 acre piece. Or like you said, it could be part of a larger ownership that is in the Winslow's chain of title or the revocable trust chain of title. And I just don't know that off the top of my head.
Troy and then Chip.
Did that pond come into play at all? I'm just curious. This is mostly just curiosity.
This here?
Yeah.
That, I believe that is a reservoir that is federally owned.
Okay.
I believe. There is the pond that's referenced in the joint resolution, or at least in the memo where there was an encroachment discovered when we began
Oh,
pursuing
I see
this.
it, yeah.
This is the
Yep,
pond
I see
here,
it.
and you can just barely see the retaining wall for that pond encroaches very slightly onto state land. So that's the pond that was discovered.
Chip.
So does this piece go to the other side of the river? It's hard to determine from that diagram, if it'll go to the other bank of the river, or is the river the defining border at this
It's a
point?
terrific question, and it comes up often, either when parcels boundaries abut roads or waterways, because it depends. Sometimes the center of the river bottom is the boundary. Sometimes, center line of the road or edge of the right of way. In this instance, the way our surveyors read the deed and mapped the parcel, it is the center line of the river.
It is.
The boundary.
That's the Connecticut River boundary between New Hampshire
Exactly.
and Vermont.
Mhm.
So who owns the piece on the other side of the river?
You know that always comes up, and I don't know the answer to that question. It is not in.
Just curious.
It's not in ownership common with Mr. Winslow or the
Okay.
revocable trust.
So I'm trying to get my bearings on this. Is there a access to the West River Trail? Is there a parking lot on one side of this? Where is that parking lot?
Yes, let me help get you oriented here. Jamaica State Park, the developed campground and the public access point where you go over that teeny tiny bridge that I think V-Trans is about to replace. That's here. So you'd enter the park and park there, and then you'd be able to travel along the West River Trail. On the far end, also off the map, is Hamilton Falls Natural Area, which similarly is a very small parking area. You can hike down to the falls. It's in a smaller residential area where we try and do a lot to manage the number of cars. So we actually really encourage folks to access through the state park. But this is about 2.5 miles. So it's not an insignificant walk if you're just there to go take a dip in the pools at the base of the falls. So there's public access at either end. We would also retain public access across Jacobs Road. This is an old class 4 road. So when this parcel, if it is exchanged with Mr. Winslow, we would retain public access and forest management rights across that parcel as well.
Do we have public access? We have public access right now across his property on Jacobs Road.
This road,
That one,
we
but
do.
not Jacobs Road.
No.
So in the land swap, we would get public access through that road
Yes.
that goes through his property.
Yes.
Where is his house again?
This house.
Is it right there? Okay, but, okay.
Mhm. And then we would, he would extinguish through the acquisition, the vehicular right of access along the West River Trail to that 5.4 acres. So that in the minds of our state land managers, that's one of the most significant pieces of this transaction would be to eliminate the potential for future more residential type management of that access point for vehicular access, which would really tremendously interfere with the type of public access and the popularity of this trail system right now. You can also see here's a spur trail. Portions of that are on the 5.4 acre parcel that is not currently protected. So at any point, Mr. Winslow could decide to cut off public access to that, which would result in us having to reroute it onto state land. And anybody that's visited this trail knows that the topography isn't particularly forgiving when it comes to rerouting trails. Steep, very steep.
John.
There's currently a deed restriction for any kind of development other than forestry and recreation in the purple area, correct?
Not currently. It would be proposed. So if we conveyed a deed
With those restrictions.
with those restrictions.
How about the blue square that he's gonna retain?
This one, I suspect that he has, I'm not aware of any restrictions on that parcel. I don't know what his access is like because I think Turkey Mountain Road is quite a bit further out, and I don't see anything that represents a current access point.
This will give him access with vehicular traffic, so if he wanted to log up there, he'd be able to get, we're not creating a landlocked piece.
No,
No,
no. No. In fact, if this is landlocked, we're helping.
right, currently it's
Connecting
landlocked.
that parcel. Mhm. Great questions. Others?
So we are swapping state-owned 24.7 acres, which is in the purple. We're swapping that for the 5.4 acres that's in the yellow.
Yes.
And what that would mean is right now, that 5.4 acres, the Winslows do have the ability to build on that if they wanted to.
Mhm.
With the swap, there would be no building allowed.
Mhm.
And continued public access,
Mhm.
which they're allowing now, but we would then have control of that.
Yes.
And by the Winslows receiving the 24.7 acres would say that for Jacobs Road, which now does not have public access,
Mhm.
allow public access, the Jacobs Road would now allow public access for that. We would not be building on that purple, but he could build on the purple.
He would not be able to.
You would
build
not
it.
be able to build based on the deed restrictions.
The deed would be drafted such that it would limit the use to recreational and forest management purposes.
Questions? Thoughts?
Do you know whether or not any of this land is in current use now?
He he might have these two parcels. I don't know. This looks awfully open. I could confirm that for you. My suspicion is that maybe not. If this is 24.7 acres, that smaller parcel down here might not meet the use value acreage requirements. So he might not.
Where it's going with that is if there was a current forest management plan that existed.
He may have a forest management plan. I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, I just have a question in terms of the, the 24 acres and the 5 acres as a switch. Like, is this considered an appropriate and good deal because the riverfront has a much higher value? Because otherwise, I wonder why we're not trading a smaller piece that would still connect his land.
That's a great question. We did a preliminary valuation. We contracted with an appraiser. They gave us a value range that put the parcels within basically commensurate value to one another.
Huh.
We hadn't confirmed the acres at that point. We actually just probably the weeks in between when the Senate heard testimony on this and today got a more comprehensive appraisal back from that same appraiser, and she was able to confirm that they both come out to about $40,000.
40,000. Okay.
So they're equal in value according to her appraisal.
Yeah.
One of the reasons the configuration is the way that it is, we talked about whether we could make it smaller because there are ways to accomplish what Mr. Winslow was looking for in connecting the parcels. And we thought, can we make this smaller? Our land manager said there's beauty and utility to be had in straight boundary lines. The forester in this case was really trying to encourage us to make this as clean as possible from a boundary maintenance perspective. And I have to agree with him.
That's
We have
fine.
There's so many acres of land and 2 licensed land surveyors. It seemed like that was a really good thing to be thinking about. So our decision to propose was something that had a really clean boundary line and would not be adding pins or corners or changes of angle to the parcel.
The questions on this one?
Was that a field in the lower part of that?
Here,
No, on
Where
the
the
new
trail?
piece, yeah, right there.
it does look more open. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if the land cover ortho was maybe in the fall or spring, and it's just that that's mostly hardwood forest and there
Oh, yeah.
are no leaves on the trees.
Okay,
That would be my guess.
yeah, okay.
The questions on this one?
There's sugaring operation going on there?
There are no sugaring licenses at Jamaica State Park. No. We do have them on some other state lands where we
Yeah.
license to
Yeah.
private sugar makers.
Anything else? So let's move to Coolidge. Right, go off the river. Go north.
Yep, we're headed to Woodstock.
North.
That's great. So this is interesting. When you talk about complex projects being brought forward, this one's actually very simple, but to describe it and to project it visually makes it feel really complicated. So I'm going to do my best to describe this in a way that has you following along and understanding what's going on here. So allow me to do my point and explain again. And speaking of like land ownership and land use patterns over time, this is a perplexing one. The green, again, is state land. This is Coolidge State Forest. And the blue is the Ellertson land, the privately owned land. Somehow, for some reason in the past, we each ended up with landlocked parcels. So the state, this parcel here, we do not have legal access to that parcel currently. We work with neighbors if we are going to be conducting forest management, we look to neighbors to provide us with permission to cross their land for purposes of timber harvests or other activities. But we do not have access to this. Similarly, Mr. Ellertson here, who owns this parcel as well, does not have legal access to his parcel, and typically looks to us to provide him with what's called a special use permit so that he has the ability to manage his forest. And similarly has to work with some private landowners to make this possible. And we, again, this is a proposal that germinated in-house. Our state lands forester said, boy, wouldn't it be a really good idea if we approached Mr. Ellertson to see if he would be interested in a swap. Very similar forest types, nothing particularly significant that would say, you know, the state really should own this. It's a vernal pool, or it's a rare natural community. There's a trail, or, you know, something that would suggest that this parcel is really critical to remain in state ownership. That wasn't the case here. And the benefits gained from participating in the swap were huge when it comes to being able to manage the forest effectively. We also will be obtaining a right-of-way for a trail that exists currently to the summit of Old Baldy Mountain. So there really are pretty obvious benefits. Not to mention, it's exciting when we can be the kind of landowner that says, let's get creative and let's come up with a solution here. And in this situation, we were able to come up with a plan where we would each be exchanging about 102 acres. This is 102 acres that would come into state ownership. And here's 102 acres that would be released from state ownership and would go to Mr. Ellertson. The pieces in the middle here, this will be retained by the state. This will be retained by Mr. Ellertson. The yellow band here represents the, I think it's 400-foot right-of-way that would provide access to the summit of Old Baldy. 400 feet isn't an accident. The state land staff walked that trail, looked at some of the areas where improvements could be made, and determined that some relocating would be beneficial to make it more sustainable, and wanted to request that the width be able to accommodate any changes in the footprint of that trail.
So I'm trying to visualize where we are. So if you look on the map on the left, you've got Albertson's piece. It's wide on the bottom, and then it goes up to a small little square. That small little square stays with him. And the big rectangle at the bottom of the blue, his part, comes to us.
Yes.
And then you go up to our part, the green, and the top rectangle piece goes to him. And that little L dog leg comes to us.
Stays with us.
Stays with us.
Yes.
To hook on to that little square.
So if you look at this, this is kind of the before, the middle, and the after. So this is what the configuration would look like after the transaction takes place. So blue would be consolidated for Ellertson, green would be consolidated for Forest Parks and Recreation, and we would retain that 400-foot wide band for purposes of accessing the summit of Old Baldy.
Just for us or for anyone?
For the public.
For the public.
We would maintain that for the public.
Okay. Troy and then John.
I'm just, again, curious, did you consider like doing
Yes,
this?
we
And then
did.
give him this and you keep this?
We did exactly that. The way the acreage worked out, when I wish Gannon were here because he would be able to describe the process of having conversations with Mr. Ellertson and our state land staff. And for the sake of simplicity, we said, you know, like, let's hunk it in half and you get this, we get that, you know, great. And the acreage didn't come out square. And we relied on Mr. Ellertson to indicate where he thought a good starting place would be for that. And when he saw the acreage, he said, you know, it just feels like it would be better if we had the same acreage. So Gannon went through and sort of redrew it, more deliberately thinking about what are our public access needs, what are forest management access needs. There's a vast trail in this area that might look to doing some kind of relocating to get it on state land. So there was some deliberate decision-making that informed this and prevented us from being able to have that nice clean line? It's a great question. John?
Just for reference, where's the state park and camping area?
Oh, gosh. This is a part of the state that I'm
This
not
is
as
really
familiar
big,
with.
and this goes all the way to Killington.
This is and when you asked the question earlier, I pulled up the A&R Atlas, which has all of our state lands, and Coolidge State Forest is about 25,000 acres. And most of it is in this area. Parts of it are in Bridgewater, but as you said, it goes right up to Route 4 with Killington. So the state park, I believe, is along Route 100, a little further south from where we are here. But I don't know that absolutely.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
go ahead, John. No, go ahead.
So the public access across the right of way to all Baldy, I mean, there's really no trail system there now?
There is an existing trail there.
Access from what direction?
I want to say, if you look at this map here, that might be I think that is
So they're using the Bass Trail then, which it says it is.
I think that the access point would be coming in through Baldy Way, and otherwise there's a longer trail that accesses that point.
So I have a question. Go to the map on our left, the original, the land now.
This one,
So that's a total of 160 acres, the blue for him,
this is, yes.
total of 160 acres. And right now, the land trust holds a conservation easement on that,
Yes.
which would allow for a subdivision of that and development of one residential lot.
Exactly.
If it's landlocked, how are you gonna put a residential lot there?
It's a great question.
I mean, that's currently that's currently what could occur if it then goes away with this land swap. I mean, I just can't imagine if it's landlocked. Unless you do it at the very tippy corner there at the top, but is there roads near there?
I was trying to figure that out, and I know Baldy Way is one of the roads. I wish we could see a little bit further south to be able to see what the access point is. That's something that I'd have to follow up with you on to be able to provide definitive explanation.
But with the swap, it would eliminate that right to subdivide.
Yes. He would extinguish that house lot essentially by virtue of transferring that land to us. You know, we don't develop for residential or commercial purposes. So by exchanging that land with us, that right goes away.
So what happens with the land trust? What needs to occur with the land trust? Because when the new acreage that is being picked up, with the land trust have conservation rights there.
They have indicated that they're willing to put a conservation easement on the land that would be conveyed to Mr. Ellertson from Forest Parks and Recreation.
So I'm looking at the last sentence of the second resolve where it says that Mr. Albertson shall eliminate either through conveyance or extinguishment his existing right to subdivide and develop one residential lot. How can we be assured he will do that? Where is the proof that he will do that?
The distinction between those two options, one, the conveyance would just occur and the lot would no longer be relevant because it would go into state ownership and we don't develop for residential purposes. If he wanted to take a tax deduction, that's the distinction here. If he wanted to take a tax deduction, he could ask Vermont Land Trust to amend his conservation easement to extinguish that house lot. And he would be eligible, depending on value and tax advice, he could be eligible for an additional tax deduction for that change. And that's the difference. It takes time and money and energy to be able to substantiate that difference. And that's why it's a choice for the landowner to decide whether it's in their financial best interest to pursue something like that. But regardless of what happens, if that lot comes into state ownership, that residential right will go away.
If I, Madam Chair, if I may, just in the drafting process, I can distinctly remember working with Becca, and as compared to my earlier draft, she explicitly requested that I have both options in the resolve clause.
The
So I-
conveyance or extinguishment.
Right, and so I remember we had, initially, I just had extinguishment.
Exactly.
And Becca said, no, we need the conveyance language in there, so I put it in as she requested.
Mhm. John?
In transactions like this, who traditionally pays for the survey, or are the existing meets and bounds adequate?
Because it really depends. In situations where we see there's public benefit to be gained from other avenues, we might decide that we're willing in-house to pay for that survey work because we have the staff capacity and the expertise in-house. In other instances, that might be part of the way that we sort of build up that public benefit. In an instance where if we were just seeking to resolve an encroachment, say somebody like Mr. Winslow built out onto state land and we were seeking to resolve that, we might put the onus on them to pay for closing costs, surveys, and the like. So it really is on a case-by-case basis, and it is one of those levers we pull if we decide, really this is something that was initiated by the private landowner. We really should put some responsibility on them to help us make this possible. Same with municipalities that might be looking to us to say, we could really use this corner of land. We might ask them to help us pay for the survey.
Do you ever trust town records and not survey, or you just always survey?
We almost always survey. I think our experience and our history has shown that if there's an opportunity to do a survey, we're always better off.
Yep.
We, find all kinds of strange title issues. Yeah, things that really it's in our benefit to resolve. We're working on a conservation project right now where there's an outstanding occupancy right of a mobile home that is no longer there. But the question is, could that person come back and put a mobile home on the property because it's in the deed that they have this occupancy right? So we really do try to do our best to do that survey work and that title work prior to taking ownership.
Any questions?
I think it's apparent you've done a lot of work here. I want to support that work.
Our land conservation program manager's done a lot of work. I just get to come and talk about it.
Good math.
Great.
Anything else? I think on this one, it would be really good to hear from the land trust. Because
Sure.
they are involved in this
Mhm.
one way or another, just to make sure we cover our bases. I'm not sure who we would get in.
I think it would be a good idea for me to maybe check in and see who Gannon had been working with at the land trust on this. My sense is that it's going to be Donald, but I should confirm that. And then would it make sense for me to follow? Yeah,
Circle back.
I will do
Phil.
that.
I just want to cover our bases. Is there other folks would be interested in hearing on either one of these parcels? Just make sure we cover our bases. I'd like Senator Harrison to come in.
Mhm.
I invited her again this morning, but she's tied up with working on a last minute change to a bill.
Okay, we can schedule her in. Anything else? Any other folks you want to bring in?
One
John?
last question. None of these trigger subdivision regulations and they count. And it doesn't look like they do, they don't change borders.
I don't think so. I mean, we may, no, because they're all different parcels. Yeah, you're correct. They will not need to be subdivided because they're all, freestanding parcels.
Anything else? Get that covered.
Thank you
That's
very
helpful.
much.
And we'll see what we do with it.
Yes, and I'll reach out with the VLT contact, and if you have any questions or want me to come back in, I'll stand by.
And
Great.
Madam Chair,
Thank you.
if you see me need to modify any of the language, let me know, and Becky and I will work on doing everything.
Indeed.
That's great. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
So that was a little different for us. It's not
Interesting.
a capital bill. We deal with a lot of different things. Yeah. Anything else that you folks are interested in? We didn't have anything else scheduled this morning. I know, I really appreciate Troy with his baseball hat. Today's opening day. Particularly down in Fenway.
Is that the Brewers?
They're at home today.
Do you have
They're at
Milwaukee
home.
connections?
Yeah, it's not snowing
I
down
remember
there.
that. I was born in Waukesha, right?
Huh?
Probably chilly, Joe, yeah.
Well,
I have no
Yeah.
idea. They're all new players, so I
I
have no
know.
idea.
I did.
I have no, it's not sale. Sale's not opening. He played, he
My parents were
pitched just the other day. So it's
An
not-
interesting note that, talking about right of ways and stuff. The gentleman has a right of way right through the middle of the Escutney Park and Ride. If you look at the far end, the signs there that say don't block, that's 'cause the guy's got a right of way right through the middle of it.
This way or this way?
Right from Route 131, right directly through the long way.
Through the long way?
Yeah.
Really? Really? Huh. Anyway. So I'd like to, I don't have anything else scheduled. I know we're gonna be working, we've had a couple of things happening with other committees. We have S14, which is dealing with restorative justice practices as well, and we talked about that on Friday. So we're gonna figure out a path forward on that with House Judiciary Committee. And we're just not there yet. Gonna have more conversations with Martin Lalonde just to see where his schedule is, where they are, because they have a lot more Senate bills that have come in. There was also another bill that has arrived. I can't remember what the number is on this bill. It deals with putting in a program for forensic facilities. A program to deal with folks who are neither in corrections or Department of Mental Health, but it's talking about establishing a program for them to be in a secure facility. I keep asking the question, where are the beds? Because the bill is silent on that. It creates a program, but it's like, where are these secure beds?
Is this a forensic?
Forensic.
This is,
So that bill is coming over. I think it was up for third reading yesterday in the Senate, second reading? Third. And Representative Lalonde, Representative Wood and I kind of had a brief conversation yesterday. Representative Lalonde and I had a conversation on Tuesday. He thought the bill would come here. He said, there isn't any beds. It's setting up the program. I said, I think it goes to House Judiciary, not us. But we need to be involved because you gotta put the people somewhere. And nobody's talking about this.
It's S89 if you want.
Is it S89?
Yeah.
So we may be getting into that kind of work, to figure that one out. I don't know what they're thinking. And I think the question has been asked of the senators, where are the folks gonna be placed? And I think what has been said, well, we'll find that somewhere. I don't know where, because you can't mix these populations with with facilities that we get Medicaid reimbursement with. So I don't know what the thinking is there. I don't know if the thinking is we'll deal with the beds later. That has implications for us. So that's in the hopper. And then Tristan, you're working with our legal staff, Ben Novagoski, on some rewrite or look-see of Title 28.
yes, Madam Chair, this is following up from the committee conversations we've had about wanting to take all our thoughts and look at Title 28. And I've been talking to Ben about giving us a short form bill that could kind of give the committee something to take testimony on. Then looked at that document that I drew up, it seems like ages ago
It
now.
was just about,
He's considering that in his language. He's considering the fact that there's a lot of interest in really looking at building a program for EOC and not just the building. So he's just looking for he's putting together some language that I think is looking to strike a balance to give us a vehicle to talk about some of these things in the committee. So hopefully he'll have that for us soon. We can schedule some time after the
Maybe next week.
Yeah.
Next week. So with Ben, if we do a short form bill, what happens, the bill gets introduced on the floor, it comes to the committee. If we're gonna really work on a short form bill and take it off the wall to work on, we need to do a roll call vote for that. It's a little different process for sure. And a short form bill does not have any, has the intent of what you're trying to address, but doesn't have any of the language on how you go forward. So basically what a short form bill, it's like a committee bill that's developed, only it already has a number. That's really the technical difference for that. So if you're gonna if we want to pursue this, then you need to get Ben to you need to submit it to get it.
That's what that's.
If the committee's interest.
Is there going to be time next week to look at developing the work group idea that we had talked about? Okay.
That's connected with the discussions with S14.
And I also want to say, I think this bill that I was just talking about is, I think part of my intention is to make that available as a vehicle to get into some of these discussions.
This is really the time to do a lot more background to get us ready for next session. The other thing too, I've spoken, I've mentioned this to the committee before in passing, and then I also spoke with Representative Dolan, Karen Dolan, because she's really working on the restorative justice piece. And one thing that I would like to do in the next few weeks is schedule testimony to really bring the committee up to speed in terms of what initiatives have really taken place over the last 20 years in corrections. I think that there is a real thinking that that not much has been done, and we're incarcerating a lot of folks that shouldn't be incarcerated. And this, in terms of really looking at the population that's being incarcerated, this was really starting to be looked at back in the late 90s. And a lot of folks aren't even aware of this. And I think I've said this to the committee before, but I remember back, it was like 98, 99, we had already built Newport. In Newport at that point, I think was 250 to 300 beds. We were at the same time building the 100-bed work camp. There was a working group that was the Sakaro working group task force that made a recommendation that we needed 400 beds for a work camp at that time in the 90s. So we built Newport, and we built the 100-bed work camp at St. John's, adjacent to the current regional facility there. With plans to build another facility in the southeast corner of the state, because the current facility that was there was in Woodstock. And that building was leased from Windsor County by the state as a correctional facility. So when folks were arrested in Windham County, parts of Bennington County, Windsor County, they would go to the Woodstock Correctional Facility. The lease was expiring. So the proposal was to build 350, possibly a 500-bed facility in the southeast corner of the state. It would be a combination of a regional facility to replace the Woodstock facility and a central facility that would be like Newport and St. Albans. So that's why the Springfield facility was there. And that was being built in the late 90s, early 2000s. So at the time we were building beds, a lot of beds. We were bringing almost almost 700 beds online at that time. And the commissioner at the time, Commissioner Fortune, came before this committee and said, we cannot build ourselves out of this, and we are not going to build ourselves out of this. We really need to look at who we are incarcerating and who's taking up these hard beds. Because at the time, we were paying $30,000, $40,000 a year to incarcerate someone. And he said, do we really want to spend taxpayer dollars for folks who are incarcerated for misdemeanors with low to moderate risk to reoffend and low severity in crimes? Why are we taking up our hard beds with folks like this? We should be using our hard beds for folks who are violent offenders, high risk to reoffend, and high severity in crime. High severity in crime. That's who we should be doing. The other folks, he was saying, should be accountable to their home community. We should have a community system in place that provides that peer support and peer review and allow a process that the harm can be repaired, repair the harm. And he came up with the reparative boards and the community justice centers. That's where it all started. To divert folks from the incarcerated beds to a community support system that is restored. And that all started in 1999 and 2000. That was the beginning of this, with the goal of diverting those folks that were taking up a hard bed, that they wouldn't even come into corrections. They would be taken care of in the community with their peers.
And has the reparative portion of that worked? Has it been successful?
Well, we started out very small with reparative boards. And gradually now, how many community justice centers do we have?
20, I believe.
14, 20 something. It's grown. So if you look at the population that is incarcerated now, very few are there for misdemeanors. Very few. If they are, it's more property burglaries and occupied.
Could we get I think it would be, we don't need people's names or anything like that.
Yep.
Could we get a list of that? Because I think it'd be really informative for everybody to understand the nature of the crimes that people are in there for. And,
We've had that, and we can get that. I think people really need to see that, because this is what we have done since the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. And that's what I would like to bring the committee up to speed with, all of these initiatives that have occurred. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. Also, Representative Lalonde suggested maybe we have a joint committee meeting to try to do this. I mean, when you do that, you're at a higher level of the testimony, but I'd like this committee to do a little deeper dive in that, if people are interested. We were also in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, we added another 100 beds for the work camp. We did that in the Windsor facility. So we had 200 work camp beds. And those, for a work camp, those were people with, I think, 2 or less years in their sentence, I think. And for a work camp, you got day-to-day credit. So if you had a 2-year sentence and you were eligible and participated in the work camp, your sentence was cut in half for every day you served in the work camp. So a 2-year sentence was equivalent, you'd be out in a year, you could reach your minute. In the work camp, you physically left the facility and you did work for municipalities and nonprofits. They'd have work crews that went out. They would do carpentry work, building work, painting. They would do all sorts of things for your local municipalities or nonprofits. And gradually what was starting to happen because of the initiatives we put in place with the reparative board and community justice systems, those folks weren't coming through the system anymore. They may be going through the courts, they weren't going to corrections, and our beds were becoming empty. So then we closed the beds in Windsor because we didn't have enough people. And that's why Windsor ended up closing. We had the 100 beds up in St. Johnsbury. Well, about, it's gotta be 15 years ago, it was when Governor Shumlin was governor. So that was 2011, 2012. He proposed to close that work camp because we only had, of the 100 beds, we barely had 50 beds for folks that qualified to be in a work camp. These were just males. And we negotiated to keep those other beds open for the folks who would be released, but where they don't have housing. That's where those folks were. Now we have maybe 10 people that qualify for work camp. So we have the beds, but nobody's coming in because we've put these initiatives in place. So what we also did was we worked with the Council of State Government and their Justice Center to really find out what's our projection for our incarcerated folks and what are initiatives we can do to bend the curve. We were projected to have about 2,800 folks incarcerated over time. And we put in some initiatives with Justice Reinvestment One about really looking at those misdemeanor crimes that were property related, unoccupied property related, but were driven by substance use. And we put in initiatives there. We've also put in overtime initiatives for pretrial services. So before a person goes to trial, we put in some pretrial services. It's housed under the Attorney General's office. So when someone is due to go to trial, maybe they don't even have to go because they've dealt with the mental health issues or substance use issues. So we put in a lot of initiatives that folks aren't aware of. And I want to bring the committee up to speed on this because it has impacted our population. Right now, we are incarcerating about 1,200 folks. And we were projected, I think, about 2,800. So I just want to lay that foundation for folks. And we'll get, Wayne, we've had this in the past, a breakdown of the number of folks who are incarcerated, the breakdown of their convictions, their sentence, and what they're convicted. And 98% of them are felonies. They're listed crimes for the big one. And the misdemeanor one are domestic violence.
I was just gonna say, I just looked it up. So there are 18 community justice centers as of 2023. Yeah. And just one other thing I wanted to say is that in terms of the populations, there are a small, or actually, I don't know what the number is, but there are a segment of people who repeatedly have issues with misdemeanors, who have both mental health and substance use issues that end up incarcerated and going in and out of our system. There's a individual from Windham County who was in the paper in the last few weeks who has been arrested over 80 times in the last few years. And all of them are misdemeanors. And he spent long times in prison at points because our court system is messed up. But it's not with severe crimes, it's with small crimes. But we don't, in my opinion, we haven't figured out throughout the state how to deal with individuals who have mental health issues that sometimes will dabble into substance use. And what do we do with those folks? Because we still do have people that are landing in our correctional facilities where those are the root causes.
And that's a direct result of the deinstitutionalization of our mental health system. That's a direct result because that was happening in the 80s and 90s with the plan that our community support system would pick up those folks. And those folks, some of those folks are still being institutionalized, but they're being institutionalized in our correctional facilities, which is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate completely. But that was the model. And for some folks, there needs to be a different type of bed and it's not available. So it's putting pressure on corrections. That's what's happening.
So there was a point in time in the 1990s where driving license suspended, multiple counts would go to jail.
Yeah.
We had a one-armed man in Newport who had 20 DLS charges, just never got his license, didn't have the money to get his license. Judge put him away for 14 months, 14 months for driving without a license. So things have changed. I worked with John Gorchak, forming one of the second diversion board in the state of Vermont in Caledonia County when he was in the, he was a probation officer. John was
That's
with-
way back.
Yeah, that's right. That was
Way back.
1981, somewhere around there.
That's way back.
Yeah, actually it was before that, it was in the late 70s, but you're right. I mean, it would be good to know who's in jail and for what, because things have changed a lot. And, and even the furlough program that when it was first initiated, the furloughs would be yanked left and right. Just if you're at a place, if you're lose your housing, if you lose your job, everything just back in. So I think we've made a lot of progress in that respect. Are you still mumbling? Or lying?
Tell John that I'm gonna mumble.
You're gonna mumble.
My committee says I do not mumble.
Loud and clear, Madam Chair.
So I just got a text from the speaker. We have a little change of plans this afternoon. We're going first.
Wow.
We're on first base instead of third.
Right.
We're going first before the appropriations.
You can say it.
So, yeah, woohoo.
Wide awake.
Yeah, it'll be spunky for us.
That was funky. I was hoping.
Any
So
idea why that happened?
I think there's probably amendments to the appropriations bill. So whenever there's amendments that pop up, the committees have to work on them. So I just got that text. So anyway, so I do want to allow more time for you folks to get your reports in order and to work with me if you've got some questions. And remember, we're a team out there to do this. But getting back to corrections, we're going to try to really do some work here for folks to really understand this. And I think what Michelle was saying is we've seen this in the past. I've got some back documents of this, of the breakdown of who's incarcerated. And it really hasn't changed much over the last 8 years for that. And the other thing I really want to work with the committee too is to understand, we haven't really dealt with this. We did on the periphery. I want folks to understand the different statuses of folks. You know, we've got parole, we've got probation, we've got the incarcerated, we got the parole board. I wanted to get the chair of the parole board in so folks can understand how parole works. The changes we've done on furlough, the types of furlough that we have, that people may not realize what type of furlough. You're going to hear from constituents, that guy, he's out. Why is he out? Well, why does he not have bail? And he should be having bail. Well, bail is there for risk of flight. It's not there for the severity of the crime. It's for risk of flight. Why is this person out? They're out on parole. How come they can get away with this? Well, when you start asking corrections, maybe the person isn't out on parole. They're out on furlough. So there's different there's different conditions there. There's a different recourse. So those layers are really, really important for us as a committee that has looks at corrections policy to understand those moving pieces. And that's what I want you folks to think through and understand that. Does that make sense to the previous members, Michelle and Mary?
Yeah, I think it's
Any
important to have
way
that
in?
foundation. Yeah.
Any weighing in, Mary, anything? Are we off base?
I thought I was hearing that there was a move to do away with bail.
There's a bill that came over,
Yeah, no bail
That
for
is-
misdemeanors.
and it's a sentencing commission would be looking at that. That's what the bill says.
Just one kind of wondering how do they expect people to show up if they don't have bail?
That's the bill requires the sentencing commission to take a look at bail and different parameters around that. So that went to Judiciary Committee, that came out of Senate Judiciary Committee.
So Judge Jaron, who we retained just this week, sat in Caledonia County. You know, two young men who he kept releasing, and they kept committing crimes and using drugs, and he got a lot of flack in the press about it, releasing these guys. And of course, he came to us and he explained what the bail statute was. Brian Gallimore didn't understand the bail statute.
Well,
So
it's
we
by
had
the
a,
Constitution.
yeah, oh, yeah.
Bail.
So we had a little lesson on bail and what the purpose of bail was and how it's used in the courts. And everyone stood corrected, and Judge Gyron finally got the message, and these two fellows were, and I knew both of them. So they just kept coming back, and finally he held them on what's kind of called a condition 4, that they could only be released to a responsible adult. And no one was willing to take possession of them or take care of them, and they both ended back in jail. But boy, the community was really, really uptight about it. I mean, the Caledonia Record was all over him. So we had a really good decision about that. He's only been on the bench 1 year, so he's got a real learning curve going on. He's going to tutor with a more experienced judge, and he's going to learn the process a little bit better. But the press was relatively unfair to him for a situation that just kind of got out of control. But it's not that unique. We talk about misdemeanors and committing multiple misdemeanors in a short period of time. Now mostly drug driven. It's a real difficult piece for both the court and the corrections to deal with.
So anything else, any other thoughts? Does that seem like a path
Yeah,
forward for the
I think
committee?
it's worth a conversation.
Yeah.
Any
Absolutely.
thoughts, any folks maybe you want to have come in? Just kind of grappling who can give this history. One thought I'd love to get in is former Commissioner Fortune, because he
Yeah.
really had a vision. And it was
Yeah.
his vision that changed our direction. And there was John Perry too.
Yeah. I still keep in touch with John.
Yeah,
Perry.
he's in.
Steve Gold's
Steve Gold is?
You just sent me an email, he's a constituent.
Steve would be great.
I think you'd be good too. He said I want to pick his brain on this stuff.
Yeah.
Because he was here with Justice Reinvestment One.
Yeah, I could ask him.
Oh, that would be
That's
terrific.
What about a director from the CJC to talk about some of the
I was
programs
thinking,
like
is Willa the director now?
No, it's Jill.
diversion and repair
It was-
panels
Willa
and stuff like that?
Farrell is with diversion
Oh,
and
she-
pretrial services.
Okay, right, yeah.
And then there's Jill Evans and the crew for community justice centers.
I think we should hear from them.
I think it would be good to have somebody come in and talk about those programs. I mean, I can talk about them sort of, but they would be
Yeah.
better.
About what's going on now. Because
Yeah.
it changes pretty
Yeah.
often.
I'd like to do victim services.
Victim services, yep. So Phil has taken all this down.
Just,
Wayne?
Senator Norris actually worked in St. Albans.
What was his position?
I don't know, but he was in, probably as a guard or something like that,
Correctional officer.
but yeah, correctional.
They're not guards.
Back early on, maybe during the 90s or 80s or 90s time period. Was the sheriff for 20 years, so before that.
Yeah. Michelle?
I'd be interested in looking at the compassionate release and parole eligibility bill that's on the wall as well.
We've done a lot of work on that, and we beefed up medical for one.
But it's partly about age also.
Yeah, and we've done the demographics for that too, so we can do that. So we've done work on that, and so did the council of state governments do work on that. Anything else? So I'll let you folks go. You can work on your reports. Please check in with me and make sure you're okay. I want each one of you that's reporting to check in with me, please. If you don't, I'm gonna track you down.
Hunt you down.
I'm gonna track you down, and Chip and I are there for backup. So we'll go off of YouTube. We are on the floor at 1 o'clock, and we're coming.